have read 27 books so far this year in 2024, and I'm going to give you a reading progress update and what I think about those 27 books. I'm going to be giving you really short reviews because we have to cover 27 books. So let us start off with the video now. Hi everyone, I'm Ashna Balasubramaniam and welcome to my YouTube channel. The first book I read this year is called The Leader Without a Title. I started off with a self-help book because I wanted to start the year on a very energetic note, and The Leader Who Had No Title was a really good book that I read. It talks about leadership in all levels of regardless of your levels at your workplace or whatever you're doing, whether you're a part of your business or any role that you are undertaking. It talks about taking on leadership, ownership and accountability at that, and it is a pretty motivating read. Robin Sharma actually walks you through a story. So some of these people lead very simple lives and are probably at entry-level jobs or jobs that you may not take much notice of, and such people are also doing their work honestly and they take on this complete ownership and accountability. So Robin Sharma walks you through all of those qualities. You learn some of these acronyms to actually put those qualities together for you to remember. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. I honestly think that this book is something that every person in any organization should read right from a junior level. This book that I'm going to talk to you about is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So as the title tells you, Evelyn Hugo has seven husbands. So Evelyn Hugo was a very popular star in Hollywood, but of course now she has aged. But her past and her life has always been the focus of news stories and news articles. So right now, a young and upcoming journalist, Monique Grant, is actually chosen for this job of writing Evelyn Hugo's biography. So nobody knows about this. Evelyn Hugo summons her personally and talks to her about her life story. Of course, that is not without a catch. So Monique is basically a nobody, okay? And when she actually looks at Evelyn Hugo's life, Evelyn Hugo herself tells that she's neither a very good person nor a bad person. So this was like the story of a very morally grey person, her mistakes and her sacrifices, how she actually rose to fame in Hollywood, what are all the challenges she encountered, and of course the story behind The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. So I really enjoyed reading this book. I rate it again like a 4.5 stars rounded off to 5 stars, and I highly recommend that you read this as well. So the next book that I read is called A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tillie Cole. So this book talks about Poppy and Rune who fall in love in their childhood. They are neighbors, they fall in love in their childhood and they kind of grow up together. Somewhere in between, Poppy disappears from Rune's life and then comes back to it. What is the mystery behind Poppy's reappearance? And will Rune and Poppy be able to get along? Their love story, their hardships and all the things that they encounter. It's a very beautiful read, a very innocent read. The reason why this book is called A Thousand Boy Kisses is because Poppy's dying grandmother tells us how special her grandpa's kisses were. So Poppy also makes it a mission to collect 1,000 special kisses. And of course, like anytime she shares a special kiss with Rune, she puts it into a jar. The only downside to this book is that you will cry a lot. It's a very beautiful book, but then it's very heart-wrenching too. So yes, proceed with caution, but this is a very beautiful book. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. So this book is a rivals to lovers story. Mallory Greenleaf and Nolan Sawyer, they are two chess players. Of course, Mallory Greenleaf is currently not an accomplished chess player, and she sees Nolan Sawyer on TV, who is already a star, and one day she is in a tournament where she has to play against Nolan Sawyer in a charity tournament. And then after that, how Mallory Greenleaf shoots to fame and how it is difficult as a woman in the chess field and all the challenges that she encounters. Mallory Greenleaf is not someone who does very well in her personal life because her dad, who was a chess champion, is no longer with them, and she has two more siblings and a mother who is currently sick. So how she battles all of these challenges and how she actually falls in love with Nolan Sawyer, and the love story that comes up between them. That is what this story is all about, and this is one of the best books of Ali Hazelwood. I rate it a 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is called Wildfire. It is by Hannah Grace. This is the second book in the Maple Hill series, and the next one releases on 27th August this year. All of these are standalone books. The lead characters of this book are Russ and Aurora. So they have a one-night stand, and after which Aurora just disappears. And then they meet again as camp counselors. So both of them have really complex family backgrounds. Both of them are going through something really difficult at homes. But then when they come together, they tend to find peace in each other. And how this romance blossoms and how they actually overcome these demons that keep pulling them back to their family's demons is what the story is all about.
I really enjoyed this. It was a great read, a very light-hearted read, and again, I highly recommend this book as well if you like the romance genre. Wildfire is definitely something you should read.
So if you're not already familiar with it, I've been doing a series of 2024 book releases, the popular book releases, so that you have an idea if those books are good and it is worth picking. So I've already made one video. You can check that out. I'll link that in the description box below. I'm planning to make another video which I'll be posting very shortly. The next book that I read is called Bride. This is by Ali Hazelwood. This is the story between a vampire and a werewolf. So both cannot stand each other. Misery Lark is a vampire who is forced to marry a werewolf just because her dad has to keep up an end of a bargain. As in, they want to keep a peace treaty between them, and which is why she's forced to marry the alpha of the werewolf pack, that is Moreland.
Misery also has her own agenda to marry the werewolf.
And once she goes into his territory, though she's the only vampire, she has a mission that she needs to stick to. So besides her mission, how is she actually going to establish that trust, and what if she's genuinely falling for Moreland, because he seems to be a pretty awesome guy. It's like an enemies to lovers story. I think I would consider this as a one-time read, not something that I would probably revisit again and again to read. So I would rate this about 3.5 stars. Yes, that's it. So the next book that I read is called Housemaid by Freida McFadden. So after Housemaid, there are 2 more books that have been released, The Housemaid's Secret and The Housemaid is Watching, which was just released last month.
I plan to read that as well, but as of now, I'll give you a review of The Housemaid.
So in The Housemaid, Millie is someone who was in prison and now she's trying to get back on track with her life. So she now finally finds a job at Nina Winchester's house. Nina Winchester is stinking rich, okay? But she kind of acts like a lunatic because she says one thing and she does another thing. She herself messes up a place and then she expects Millie to clean it up and blames it all on her. So her husband seems to be a pretty nice guy. His name is Andrew, and Andrew seems to empathize with whatever Millie is going through. So Millie has a hard time dealing with that and hard time dealing with those challenges. So she thought that she held secrets, but this family has a lot more secrets than what actually meets the eye. So this is what gets uncovered in the whole story. There are a lot of twists and I really enjoyed this book. So I would rate this book about 4 stars because contrary to what a lot of people believe, the ending was like really mind-blowing and all of that. It was great, but I won't say it's mind-blowing. The next book that I read is called Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries. So in this, Emily Wilde is actually a researcher and a scholar, and she is off to a small town where she wants to explore a lot of folklore and fairies. She's trying to compile an encyclopedia with all the fairies' qualities, their pros and cons and their weaknesses and strengths, and basically an encyclopedia that can be used as a reference for all scholars across the world. And now that she is in this town to actually try and find out the mystery amongst these fairies, she realizes that a lot of these fairies are pretty dangerous, and in addition to that, her annoying rival Wendell Bumblebee also lands in this town. She was least expecting him and she lands in this town. But then she tries to understand what is Wendell's true intention behind trying to assist her. And not just that, she encounters a lot of fairies and a lot of things. She lands herself in pretty dangerous places, even with a fairy king, and it is pretty interesting, okay? She also has a dog called Shadow, and the dog has its own mystery. So I really love the story. It's a fantasy and it's also a love story. I really loved it, and I highly recommend that you read it. So not just that, after reading Encyclopedia of Faeries, I went ahead and read the next book, Map of Otherlands, which was released this year. Okay, that's a continuation of this, and you should have read the first book to be able to read Map of Otherlands. So I cannot tell you the synopsis of Map of Otherlands because it may tend to spoil things for you if you have not read Encyclopedia of Faeries. That's why I'm just going to briefly tell you without any spoilers. There are a lot of evil fairies attacking Emily's workplace, and there is a secret reason to that. So Emily has to set out on an adventure to actually resolve this. You should definitely read this book, and I'm waiting for her next book that is going to be released in 2025. That's part 3 of this series. So both these books I would rate it 5 stars, and I highly recommend that you read it if you're into fantasy. The next book that I read is called My Tears and Words by K. Gopichand. So in this book, Krish is a young boy and he has to give up his dreams because of certain family situations, and he also faces a couple of conflicts with his father. Somehow he's pretty irritated with all the things that is going on in his life, and he seems to become a recluse because of all the things that are happening. But then he has friends who won't give up on him, friends who try to stand up for him, be there for him, and he finds a lot of solace in his friendships. Okay, and the thing is, it's a very simple read, but then it's a very moving tale. And there are places in this book where I actually ended up crying. There are also a couple of beautiful quotes in this book that I really loved reading. The only downside to this book was that I read it before editing, and because of which I felt that there were like a few editorial grooming that needed to be done. But now the book has been edited and the cover has been really well upgraded. So I think you should definitely check this out. It's written by an Indian writer, and I did love this book. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is called The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. So in this book, like, Rachel Price is someone who has disappeared, leaving behind her 2-year-old kid. But now that 2-year-old kid has grown up to be almost 18 years old now, and her name is Annabelle. People call her Belle. So since that was like a case that received a lot of attention, Belle, along with her dad and other extended family members, are doing a documentary on the disappearance of Rachel Price. But all of a sudden, Rachel Price reappears into their life out of the blue, and now they have to of course change the title of the documentary to The Reappearance of Rachel Price. But then Belle has a hard time believing as to why Rachel has now come back. So this is a thriller. I really enjoyed this thriller as well, and I would rate this about 4 stars. And if you are into thrillers, you should definitely pick this up. Holly Jackson is also the author of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Okay, so the next book that I read is a thriller again. It's called Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. So this book has a very humorous synopsis which actually led me to picking this book. Ernie Cunningham is the lead character of this book, and in his family everyone has killed someone, okay? Regardless of whether it's an accident or something else, but then as in when you read the story you'll be able to find out, okay? The family is a little twisted and dysfunctional, and the thing is now they have a reunion at a ski resort, and there once everyone joins the reunion, someone in that ski resort ends up dead. And the thing is, they can't help suspecting each other. So a lot of drama ensues there, and it was actually a very funny thriller. The ending was also good, but one thing I felt about this book was that the ending kind of turned out to be a little complex. So if you kind of like to read a thriller where people are put in together and it's a whodunit, so then in that case you should pick up this book. But personally I feel that this can be good as a one-time read. Okay, so the next book that I read is called A Ship of Teeth and Bones. This is a fantasy romance novel, and this is by Karina. So Princess Marin, who's a siren, and sirens are like mermaids, trades her life with the sea witch Edonia for a life on land because she falls in love with the prince. But things change once she goes on land. But then the thing is, she has lived with Prince Eric for 10 years, and things got really tough between them, and Eric was pretty abusive. So once when Prince Eric and Princess Marin are actually traveling by ship, it so happens that it is now attacked by a pirate called Captain Ramsay Bones. But then Princess Marin and Captain Ramsay both share a common enemy and now decide to set out on an adventure, and they are also attracted to each other. But they also have secrets of their own now. So it is a fantasy romance, and now there is also a part 2. It's kind of again like a standalone book. You don't have to read this particular book. Ocean of Sin and Starlight has been released this year, and I intend to read that as well because I really enjoyed this. But then the thing is, please read this book only if you're 18 plus because it has a lot of adult content to it. Okay, so the next book that I'm going to be talking about is called The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St James. So this book, I picked it up thinking that it is a thriller because I generally don't read much of horror books. I tend to get creeped out very easily, and it turned out to be a horror thriller. So, but this is one of my favorite reads of 2024. So Shia Collins is actually a receptionist at a hospital, and she has a blog called Book of Cold Cases. So one such case is that of a lady killer case, like early in the 70s, where two random men were shot point blank, okay? And the killer was supposed to be Beth Greer, but somehow she was acquitted of the charges and she continues living there. And now somehow Shia wants to understand what exactly went into Beth Greer's life, and she is in luck because Beth Greer actually walks into the hospital that she is working at. So she requests an interview with her and ends up getting an interview with her, and Beth Greer invites her to her house to actually listen to her story. And when she goes into the house, strange things happen, and it is, I cannot tell you how scary this whole thing was. So throughout the book, as and when I was reading, I was constantly scared. The atmosphere around me felt very cold, and I felt that it was very well written, and there were like a lot of twists and turns to that came in the end. I really enjoyed this book. I rate it about 5 stars, and I highly recommend this if you are into horrors and thrillers. So not just that, I actually did a poll recently as a penalty for not posting videos for so many days, as a penalty for being very inconsistent. I gave 4 options to choose from, and the option that was picked most was that I need to read horror books for 1 week. I'm generally very creeped out by it, but I'm going to start shooting it this week. So if you have any horror book recommendations, please drop it in the comments below. Okay, so the next book that we're going to be talking about is called The Cat Who Saved Books. It's a Japanese translation. It's written by Sosuke Natsukawa. Okay.
Rintaro is a kid who stays with his grandpa who owns a second-hand bookstore.
Because of which Rintaro has also developed a love for reading. But then unfortunately his grandfather passes away, and now the bookshop needs to be closed and Rintaro needs to go and live with his aunt. But then all of a sudden into his life walks a ginger cat, a tabby cat, and the tabby cat is called Tiger, and it is a talking cat. Okay, it's very cute. I mean, of course it's my imagination, and if you know, I also have 2 ginger cats, and because of which I found this ultra cute. So this talking cat actually leads Rintaro into different adventures. So this was a very cute story, a very light read. I really enjoyed reading this, and I do highly recommend it if you're looking for Japanese translations or light reads. Okay, so the next book that I'm going to be talking about is called The Women by Kristin Hanna. Of course, if you've seen my channel, I've already talked about this book, but this is a reading update, which is why I have to talk about it again. So this is themed around the America-Vietnam War and the role of women nurses in that war. So Frankie McGrath is the protagonist of this story, and she is living a life thinking that one day she has to get married and she has to lead a perfect life just like how she's always been trained to be. This story is happening in the 1960s. Her brother has to go into the Vietnam War, and she is going to dearly miss her brother because she was very close to her brother. And her family has always glorified war heroes, so she has always been inspired by that, but she never really thought that as a woman she could do anything. But then someone walks into her life, and he tells that women can be heroes too. And this one sentence was very life-changing for her. She applies to be a nurse at the war against her parents' wishes. It lands as a shock to them, and she goes off into Vietnam.
So not only does she have to deal with the gruesome war, she also has to deal with a lot of betrayals, but she also finds friendships there. But once she's back, life just doesn't get easier because nobody believes that women could be in Vietnam, and she is invalidated and she has to find a life through it.
So how she carves a place for herself in a society that has no place for women heroes is what the story is about, and this turned out to be one of my most favorite reads of this year. So I rate this about 6 out of 5. I know it's not mathematically correct, like I always say, but it's one of the best books I've read, and it's one of my favorite books too, and I highly recommend this book. Okay, so the next book that I'm going to be talking about is called The Woman Who Lied. And in this book, Emilia Ward is the writer, and she's the writer of the popular series Miranda Moody's detective series. Okay, so she has written about 10 or 11 books, and in the 11th book, she decides to kill off this Miranda Moody's character. Nobody knows that yet. This book is yet to be published, but then it so happens that things start happening around her exactly like her books. Okay, so the killer, there is someone out there who tries to replicate whatever happens from her books into real crime scenes. And since Miranda Moody is also going to be dying in this particular book and nobody is aware of it, somehow the scenes from this book, the unpublished book, also seems to be replicated in real life. And Emilia Ward is not far from being killed because she's the lead character in her life, the same way Miranda Moody is the lead character of her detective stories. And as of now, only her friends and family, the very close circle, have read this book, so she cannot help but suspect all the people in her circle itself. So I would rate this book a 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend that you check it out if you are into thrillers. So the next book that I read is Happy Place by Emily Henry. Happy Place is one of her most popular books, and I decided to go ahead and read it. That was the first Emily Henry book that I read. I'm really sorry to disappoint you all, but I found the first half of it really boring, and I felt like I just wanted to get to the climax of the story. But then once I got to the climax of the story, as in like the later part of the story, I really loved that. So Harriet and Wynne were a couple, and they broke up a couple of months back. So until then, they were a really cute couple, and they were together everywhere. There used to be a lot of PDA, and they used to hang out with their friends together. And now, because they've broken up, they haven't told their friends about it, and they share common friends. So Sabrina and her boyfriend Parth, along with her two other friends, I think it's Cleo and Kimmy, along with Harriet and Wynne, they all want to come together to spend one last time at the cottage because they hold so many memories there, and now the cottage is about to be sold. So Harriet and Wynne decide to act like they are still dating just because they don't want to disappoint their friends and spend those last few days in a cottage, like with their happy memories and reminiscing all their good times. During that time, they actually still have a lot of love for each other, but then they are still not together, and there is a lot of emotional turmoil that goes on between them. But then I fell in love with Emily Henry's writing because she is really good at writing and setting the scene. So that's why, though I did not like Happy Place much, I rated like a 3 out of 5 stars. I decided to give her other book Funny Story a try, which is one of my favorites of 2024.
Wow!
Okay, so the next book that I'm going to be talking about is a rom-com that was released this year. It's called Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is the second Emily Henry book that I read, but this is the best book that I have read in the whole of 2024. Okay, the best romance book that I have read. So Daphne is a librarian in a children's library, and she is about to marry Peter. So Peter comes home, and then he tells her that he no longer wants to marry her because he now realizes that he's in love with his childhood best friend Petra. So they had all the time in the world to figure that out, but just before his wedding with Daphne, he realizes that he's in love with Petra. But then Petra also has a boyfriend called Miles, so both Miles and Daphne are devastated by this latest development. So now Daphne has nowhere to go. She moves in with Miles, and somehow over time they tend to bond with each other over the common heartbreak. And also to Peter and Petra, they are pretending like they are actually dating each other, like Miles and Daphne are dating each other. So I really loved the character of Daphne, I really loved the character of Miles, and a lot of it was pretty funny, a lot of it was humorous, it has a romantic side, and overall I think that this was one very well constructed rom-com, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The next book that I read is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. A lot of you would have already read this book, and a lot of you have this on your TBR. So James Clear, the author of this book, starts off with a story of his, a personal story of his, which led him to develop these little habits to push him into the life that he wanted to get into. Okay, so it started off with a very heartbreaking story. I don't want to spoil that for you. And then after that, he gives you very practical tips on how you can make these little habits, and alongside your existing habits, make these habits stick so that you can achieve your goal in a very practical fashion. I really enjoyed Atomic Habits. It's one of the best self-help books I've read. I think you should go ahead and read Atomic Habits. I highly recommend this book. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is called The Maid by Nita Prose. So Molly Gray is a maid working at Regency Grand Hotel. So she has a very unique demeanor to her because she cannot interpret other people's body language, and she is pretty naive, okay?
So all along she had her grandmother help her navigate life, but then her grandmother passed away too. And now she was left on her own.
So one day when she walks into a suite, she finds that one of the guests, Charles Black, is dead in his room. And then she alerts people, and then all of this investigation begins, and because of Molly's peculiar behavior, she becomes one of the primary suspects of the police. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book. The ending was especially heartwarming, but then I still feel that it probably did not live up to my expectations. But still, it is a great thriller to read it once, and I would rate this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I'm going to be talking about is called First Lie Wins. I've talked about this book already in my channel. This is by Ashley Elston. This is one of my favorite thrillers of this year. So in this thriller, Evie Porter is a character who is currently dating Ryan. Okay, they have a perfect life. She meets her boyfriend Ryan's friends, and everything seems to be going perfectly, except for the fact that Evie Porter does not exist at all. It is just an identity that she's been given by a Mr. Smith because she has an assignment to do.
So Ryan is a part of her assignment, and everything seems to be going on smoothly until her original identity, a girl who looks just like her with her identity, walks in.
I really enjoyed this because once I started reading this, I just couldn't put this book down. So I rate this a 4.5 stars out of 5, and I would put it in I would definitely want you to read this thriller. The next book that I read is called The Metamorphosis. It's by Franz Kafka. It's a classic, and this is the first time that I read this book called The Metamorphosis. So Gregor Samsa is an employee. He's very diligent, but then one day he wakes up and he finds himself transformed into a giant insect. And even when he tries to talk, his sounds are as if an insect making sounds. So nobody really understands him.
After this sudden, unwelcome change in Gregor's life, his life goes askew. And of course, his family is shocked too.
I highly recommend this book, and I actually rate this book a 5 stars because I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed the story. The story moved me to tears, and it kind of pushed me to feel depressed for a few days. So if you are strong enough to read it, please go ahead and read it. But I can also tell you it's very depressing, but still it is a must read, and it is one of my favorite classics now. Okay, so moving on to the next book that I read this book called Magnolia Parks by Jess Hastings. I got this as a part of a blind book date. I bought it from the Big Book box. So it said that it is the British version of Gossip Girl. So Gossip Girl is one of my most favorite series of all time. So I think I went into this book with high expectations because it talks about the high society and two main characters in this particular book. So Magnolia Parks and BJ Ballantyne, they were dating in the past and they broke up all of a sudden. Okay, that is because of BJ Ballantyne's indiscretions. So what happens is they try to get to each other. Magnolia tries to date other people just to make BJ jealous, and BJ on the other hand, he goes around sleeping with people. And there are also a group of friends, a group of common friends, and you can see that Magnolia and BJ, they still kind of hang out together. I really didn't like it. It was just more like a back and forth in this book, like back and forth between BJ hurting Magnolia or Magnolia hurting BJ, and the same thing repeating. I was just waiting for this book to end. And the thing is, in Gossip Girl, right, each character has a lot of depth. They are morally grey. No one is all good or all bad, and it's really enjoyable to see those different layers of a character in different situations. But then this one felt really boring and I didn't enjoy this book at all. So I don't recommend this book. I rate it about 2.5 stars, rounded off to 3 stars. The next book that I read is Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. So please remember this Not in Love book is only for people above 18. So Ruth Siebert is successful at her as an employee at Klein, and she's a researcher in the field of food science. And all of a sudden there is a forceful takeover of Klein by Harkness. So just a couple of days back, Ruth Siebert almost slept with a guy called Ely Kilgore and she was really impressed by him, but then they didn't sleep together. But now Ely Kilgore seems to be a part of Harkness. She thought that he was a nice guy, but he is on the enemy's side right now. So, however, they have this arrangement where they just sleep together with each other, but then they don't catch feelings for each other because they're literally on the opposite sides of a battle. And a lot of things unfold, and how they actually work these things out, and what are the other secrets that actually unfold during this relationship, like related to their workplace or their personal selves, is what the story is about. So it's kind of like an enemies to lovers story, and I did enjoy this book, but then I felt that it was a little similar to Ali Hazelwood's other books, but I still enjoyed it, and please read it only if you are above 18. Okay, so don't expect it to be too different from Love Theoretically, Love Hypothesis and Love on the Brain. It is still kind of similar because somewhere it still kind of ends up here at the science field, but still it is a good read. So if you want to read it, please go ahead and read it. The next book that I read is called Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. It is by Satoshi Yagisawa. So this book has been hyped everywhere, so I decided to go ahead and read it because I wanted to try this Japanese translation. So the thing is, Takako is a girl who was kind of in a relationship with a guy. It was not explicitly stated that she was in a relationship, but then she discovers that this guy is getting married to a colleague of hers, and now she is heartbroken. She has nowhere to go. She puts down the papers at her workplace, and at that time her uncle, who hasn't contacted her in a long time, Uncle Satoru, calls her, and she goes ahead to live at the Morisaki bookshop. So there is like a small room above this Morisaki bookshop where she decides to live. So there, how she heals her heartbreak, how she falls in love with books, rediscovers her love for books, and how she also confronts all the terrible things that happened to her is what this book is about. So this book is divided into two parts. What I have told you is just part one of the book. Not just that, Uncle Satoru also has his own struggles, and Takano and Uncle Satoru, they tend to bond over these struggles. So it's kind of a beautiful story, no doubt. So both part 1 and part 2, they are very simple, very beautiful. But I just feel that it didn't really live up to its hype, and I kind of like got bored of reading too at a point. So I would rate this book a 3 out of 5 stars. It was honestly not too impressive, though, like, the simplicity of the story is something that I need to appreciate. So if you feel like reading it, if the synopsis interests you, or if you want to try and see if it's worth the hype, I think you should go ahead and read it. But personally, I would not recommend this book. So the next book that I read is called Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. This is my first book by Riley Sager. So the synopsis of the story is like this. Ethan Marsh, as a 10-year-old, loses his friend Billy. Okay, all of a sudden Billy is kidnapped from the tent, and ever since then, for the next 30 years, right now Ethan Marsh is about 40 years, he is living with that every single day. He's now an insomniac, he's not able to get over whatever happened, and now he comes back to live in the same place where Billy was taken away from, in his old house, because his parents have now moved out.
But in this house, he senses Billy's presence.
But then he also has like a few other troubled relationships. His wife is no longer with him, and he tries to contact her and all of that. And at the same time, the thing about this Billy is kind of haunting him. Okay, so when I read this book, throughout the book, it creeped me out a lot because it seemed a lot like horror. It's realistic, but it also has supernatural forces at play. So there are a lot of twists to this, very unexpected twists. The ending was pretty unexpected, and for a minute I did not know that if I should be overjoyed by this ending or if I should feel let down by this ending. But basically the ending was very heartwarming, and all the things that unfolded after that was, it was just beautiful. Okay, So I really enjoyed reading Middle of the Night and I would rate it a 4 stars. So if you are into thriller and if you would like a heartwarming thriller, I think you should definitely check this out. The 28th book that I just finished yesterday night is called The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley. The narration of this story has multiple points of view.
A new retreat called the Manor has been opened in the village where people can come there and relax for a while. This has been opened by Francesca, who's very fond of crystals and would like to be at peace at all times. But once the manor is opened, a lot of mysterious things start happening, right from the workers to even the guests. There are a lot of suspects and you cannot trust anybody there. You can also see strange village folklore, the birds coming to life.
Francesca is pretty optimistic about this opening despite all the protests from the local villages from there. So each person is not exactly who they say they are. Okay, so all of a sudden this manor is burned down to a crisp. So the investigation starts off there and then they start to delve into what happens in the past and what has happened like just the day before the opening and just the day after the opening and all the things that unfolded there. So there is a mystery guest and the workers who come there, they are pretty mysterious. The local folk there, they have their own secrets and there is something, as in when you read the story, right, you feel like there is something very sinister looming. And the whole atmosphere of the story is very eerie and I was creeped out at most places. So I did enjoy reading the story but it was not really up to the mark. So I rated about 3.5 stars. It is good as a one-time read but I would rate this a 3.5 stars. So with this we're done with my video. I have covered 28 books so far as of July 28th. And thank you so much for watching this. If you like these, please consider subscribing to my channel. Also connect with me on Goodreads and also on Instagram. So I'll see you next with another video. Stay happy, stay blessed and stay kind. Bye.